Greetings, everyone. Thank you for joining me. This is Michael DDA speaking. We're continuing our journey in the way of life today. Wow, we have so much to see. Abram, the spiritual man, is going to be talking about the spiritual seed today. And we're going to see is going to happen to Abraham's seed in these last days. Oh my goodness, it's so interesting to see what's going on. Let's begin with a review. Last week we only got through 14 verses. We were talking about Amraphel. Do you remember Amraphel? Who's Amraphel? Nimrod. He is coming down. Actually, it's Chedorlaomer who's coming down from the north. He's bringing lesser kings, kings that are under tribute to him, including Amraphel, Arioch, and Tidal. 4 kings coming down. They're coming down with 800,000 men, killing, raping. Remember, these men were killing giants. They attacked the Rephaim in Ashtoreth, the Zuzim in Ham, and the Emim in Kiryatayim. Then they went all the way down to Seir. Remember, that's the area that Esau is going to take over for himself in coming years. And then he went all the way down to the top of the Gulf of Aqaba, and then came back up through Kadesh Barnea, Hazen Tamar, and then attacked Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zor. It was then that there was a man who escaped. Now keep in mind, these men, as I said, they're killing, they're raping, they're pillaging. They got stuff. And you got to carry it with you, don't you? Because you live far away. And so every time they go, they're getting more and more stuff. Well, now here is somebody who escapes from Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zor from that battle, and comes running to who? The Hebrew. Ooh, Abram is called the Hebrew. Is anybody else in the world at this time called the Hebrew? You might be able to argue that the Melchizedek is, and those who follow him, but Abram is known as the Hebrew. I wonder if he's got a reputation. Do you think the reputation followed him all the way down from Babylon when he was thrown into the fiery furnace? I bet it did. They know who he is. Abram is famous. Remember, he's got a troop that is following him, a tent city. His gates hold probably 1,000 people. And in those gates, he has, what does it say here? I want to go to my translation. I worked really hard this week to get this translation right. It says, now when Abram heard that his brother was taken captive, he armed his trained house-born men. Men is added. Some translations will say servants. But I think we're talking about men. Is every man in Abram's camp a servant? Or is it possible that there's free men also in his camp who follow him? But they're not servants per se. I think that's kind of what's going to happen in the last days. Maybe I'm wrong. Maybe everyone who comes to him is a servant. It's possible. And maybe servant is a better translation. But regardless, we're talking about men. They might be men servants, but we're talking about men, not talking about ladies. We're going to see at the bottom of this chapter that it looks like they're young men. Ooh, young men. But he was able to field, he armed his trained house-born men, 318, and went in pursuit as far as Dan. He divided his forces, we saw last week, in Yasher, and defeated these 800,000 men. The only 4 who escaped was the kings. The kings. Amraphel, Chedorlaomer, Tidal, and Arioch. That is what the prophecy was all about. Let me show you something. This is the prophecy that came at Abraham's birth. I pulled up one of my blogs. This particular blog is called Abram and Nimrod. It's a 3-part series. But I wanted you to see this right here. This is Yasher, and this is the night that Abram was born. Look what it says. And when all the wise men and conjurers went out from the house of Terah. Abram's just been born. They're leaving. They're going back to their house. They lifted up their eyes toward heaven that night to look at the stars, and they saw, and behold, one very large star came from the east. Comes from the east. How come it doesn't come from the west, or the north, or the south? Oftentimes we see this, something coming from the east. Why the east? I wonder if it has to do with the way the temple faces. And they're coming towards the temple. Just a hunch. But let's continue. A very large star came from the east and ran in the heavens. And he swallowed up the 4 stars from the 4 sides of the heavens. And all the wise men of the king and his conjurers were astonished at the sight. And the sages understood this matter, and they knew its import. And they said to each other, "This only betokens the child who has been born to Terah this night, who will grow up and be fruitful and multiply and possess all the earth. He and his sons," it says sons, forever. But now it says, "and he and his seed will slay great kings and inherit their lands." I think that is still a future event. This battle with Nimrod was a partial fulfillment. But Nimrod wasn't killed, and remember, later on, Nimrod had a dream. And there was a man there who interpreted the dream. And basically the interpretation was saying that Abram was going to kill Nimrod. Actually, it was Abram's seed was going to kill Nimrod. So we're still pressing ahead. You know what? It's still Abram's seed that is going to inherit the whole earth. Look at what it says. And possess all the earth. And his seed will slay great kings and inherit their lands. Did Abram inherit any lands when he killed those 800,000 men? How about when his seed, well, we haven't seen it yet, but Esau, his seed, is going to kill Nimrod. Didn't inherit any lands then either. No, this is going to be a future event. The earth is Yehovah's and all who dwell in it. Today we're going to see something that's going to happen that is going to foreshadow what's going to happen in the last days. And Abraham's going to be told twice about it. Oh my goodness. We'll look at that in a minute. Let's continue. We then talked about the Melchizedek. Do you remember Melchizedek, king of Salem? And in Yasher, it talked about Adonai, or Adoni Zadok, king of Jerusalem. I wrote a paper this week, I hope you read it, called Pray for Jerusalem. Well, we saw that Jerusalem really is Yerushalayim. Yerushalayim. They lead peacefully. These are the men that Yehovah is raising up in these last days. Abram leads peacefully. But don't confuse peacefully with putting up with nonsense, because Abram, as we just saw, is able to take out huge numbers of men. Melchizedek, the righteous king. We could say the king of righteousness. But you know what? Look at, we make him the king of Salem. Yasher makes him the king of Yerushalayim. Same man, Melchizedek, Zadok, is a synonym for Adoni Zadok. Salem, or Shalem, is what we're talking about. Shalem is a synonym with Yerushalayim. Oh, so interesting. And those Yerushalayim, remember, those are the ones who lead by peace. When we talked about Jerusalem, the city of Elohim, we think brick and mortar. But what we need to think is holy city, a city that Yehovah is building in the hearts of his men. Jerusalem is not the city, brick and mortar, where Yehovah dwells. It's among the people who lead peacefully, the men. It's not about the ladies. Remember, the ladies are going to follow their men. The servants are going to follow their men. The sons and daughters are going to follow their dad. It's about the men who lead peacefully. The men who are following only Yehovah as their king. This is what Abram's all about. Turning the hearts of men back to Yehovah. This is what the king of Salem is all about. Turning the hearts of men back to Yehovah. He doesn't have a city. We, in our flesh minds, try to make this all about what? Jerusalem, that's right. And so we say, well, Jerusalem was called Salem back in those days, and that's where he was at. No, he wasn't. It was Jebus. And 500 years later, it's still going to be Jebus, not Shalem, or as we want to say, Salem. I think, again, this is dishonest in the scriptures to even say Salem, but maybe they're not. Maybe it's just a transliteration. Instead of being Shalem, it's Salem. But it's very similar to Yerushalayim, and we don't understand who the Yerushalayim are. Well, Abram gave a tithe, okay, a tenth. They love to use the word tithe. Of course they're going to use the word tithe. He gave a tenth, and he gave a tenth of his spoil. Do you remember? Well, it's in here. Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons and take the goods for yourself. Abram says, I'm not taking anything from you. Here it is, right down here. Well, here, let me just do this. I can raise it up. There. No, that's not far enough. Try that. There you go. He says that I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you say, I made Abram rich. Abram, 318 men, maybe a little bit more because of the Anar, Eshcol, and Mamre who went with them, with their guys, defeated 800,000 men who have pillaged miles and miles and miles and miles of property. They are bringing back a whole lot of wealth. Abram is certainly getting spoil, but he's not taking it from who? The king of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, or Zor. Zor seems to be a righteous king, but he's not taking it from those 5 cities. Why? He says, lest you say I made Abram rich. Do you think Abram understands that these are wicked, wicked kings? I think it even said something about the wickedness of Sodom in here. Maybe it wasn't in this chapter. Maybe it was the chapter before. Here it is. But the men of Sodom were exceedingly wicked and sinful against Yehovah. Do you think that it could be why Abram doesn't want to take anything from Sodom? Really, it's the kings of Sodom. And when we're talking about the kings of Sodom, we're talking about the 5 kings. When we're talking about the kings of Chedorlaomer, we're talking about the 4 kings. So when he says he's not going to take anything from Sodom, Sodom says, the king of Sodom says, just give us the people. You keep the stuff. Abram doesn't even want the stuff, lest you say you made Abram rich. Well, who made Abram rich? How about Chedorlaomer, Amraphel, Arioch, and Tidal, and all their men? Do you think Abram got a lot of riches from them? How about all the people that they stole from? But he's not going to take anything from Sodom and those kings. I think there's a bigger picture here that we need to see. If he doesn't take any of their stuff, and we're talking about all the stuff that he took, what does he have to tithe on from the spoil? Right, there's got to be other spoil that he got. And it is an enormous amount of spoil. Those 800,000 men were good enough to take all the spoil that they took and bring it all to one place for Abraham to grab when he killed them. How much do you think King Amraphel took with him, or King Chedorlaomer, or King Tidal, or King Arioch took with him when they ran away from the battle? Nothing. They're glad to get away with their life. Well, there's, like I say, there's more to this story. And we went down to the bottom of this chapter then. And the last thing that we were talking about, here, I'm going to move this up again, was this verse right here. It says, except only what the young men have eaten. The young men and the portion of men who went with me. A portion of men who went with me. Who are they? He just does it right there. Anar, Eshcol, Mamre, and their men. So there's two groups of people. His young men, and they call them young men. Isn't that interesting that they call them young men? This word that we have here for young men is this one right here, Ha-na-arim. Some say Han-na-arim. But they're young men. Look at it. It's well, you can't see it. Let me move this. How can I do this? Let me try doing it this way. That'll pull it in a little bit. Yeah. Boy. It says boy. Adolescent. By implication, a servant. Then it says by interchange, a girl. No, not a girl. It's got to be. It's got to end with the hey, to be a woman. It's a little bit deceptive. No, we're talking about men, but we're talking about really younger men. Is it possible that, this is an incredible battle. 318,000 men, or 318 men against 800,000 men. 25,000 to 1 odds. But if he did it with young men instead of old men, these are men homeborn. Doesn't that even add more to it? Do you remember Shechem? For those of you who have been with me for a while, when we talked about Shechem, and they took Dinah, Shechem did, and it was Levi and Simeon. Levi and Simeon. They were 11 and 12 years old, and they took out all the men of that city. This is the kind of people that we're talking about. This is the seed of Abraham. Powerful, powerful men. Men you don't mess around with. In this day and age, living in Babylon, it's different, isn't it? But we're going to see that was even Babylon when Israel roamed the earth with his sons. Egypt. Well, so we switch then to 15. Oh, no. I guess we left off on Melchizedek on 14. I'm kind of spacing on you here. Because this is where we left off last week, was on the Melchizedek, king of Salem. We get to finish this little portion here. Well, let's do that. And he blessed him and said, blessed be Abram of Elohim Most High. This is Melchizedek saying this about Abram. Blessed be Abram of Elohim Most High. Ooh, I want to be Michael of Elohim Most High. Would you like to be Carrie of Elohim Most High? Possessor of heaven and earth. Heaven and earth? Abram is going to possess heaven and earth? How do you possess heaven? Well, again, we think flesh, don't we? We don't think spirit. Remember, those who dwell in heaven are the ones who are being led by Yehovah. So if he's a possessor of heaven and earth, what's he a possessor of? He's a possessor of all those men who dwell in heaven and all those men who dwell on earth. spiritual leader of two kingdoms. Again, he's kind of a shalach of Yehovah in a sense. It says, and blessed be Elohim Most High, who has delivered your enemies into your hands. It says, and he gave him a tithe of all. Funny, it was Melchizedek that's saying it. It almost makes it sound like Melchizedek gave him a tithe, doesn't it? But he didn't. I don't think it is. Now the king of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons. What's he talking about? The nephesh. These are men and women. Remember, Lot, it says, he recovered. So he brought back all the goods, and also brought back his brother Lot and his goods, as well as the women and the people, the nashim and the In Yasher, we're going to see he brought back his wives and servants. This says, give us the persons, the nephesh. They use nephesh in Torah when they're going to talk about men and women. Nephesh, persons. Here's the word they used. La nephesh, or li nephesh. Give to me here it is right here, the nephesh. Ha nephesh. The persons. I guess I could have the persons because the definite article is there. Give us the persons. Take the goods for yourself. But Abram said to the king of Sodom, I have raised my hand to Yehovah, Elohim Most High, El Elyon, Elohim Most High, the possessor of heaven and earth. Possessor of heaven and earth. There we go. That I will take nothing from a thread to a sandal strap, and that I will not take anything that is yours, lest you should say, I have made Abram rich, except only what the young men, there's the young men, have eaten, and the portion of the men who went with me, Anir, Eshcol, Mamre. Let them take their portion. So even from Sodom, these men that went with Abram, not Abram, and Anir, Eshcol, and Mamre. I think they were Canaanites at least. We'll figure that out when we get to, we'll make an observation when we see it. So from here, we get to go back to Yasher, just for a moment. Here's where we left off in Yasher. We covered just a portion of it last week. Remember, I wanted to show you, because it didn't say that he killed all these kings or how many even men there were. You know what? If you don't understand that he's wiping out 800,000 men with 318, does Elohim get to be as great of a God as he is? Isn't Yehovah even more an El Elyon? If Abraham is killing so many with so few, especially if they're young men. Well, so much more to see if we have eyes that will look at the Hebrew and see it. It said Abram recovered all the property of Sodom. And he also recovered Lot and his property, his wives and little ones. His wives and little ones. Nashim and Tafim, or maybe just Taf, can be used as the plural. All belonging to him. so that Lot lacked nothing. And he returned from smiting these kings, and he and his men passed the valley of Sadim. Remember, that is the Salt Sea, the valley of the Salt Sea, where the kings had made war together. And Bera, king of Sodom, and the rest of his men that were with him went out from the lime pits. The lime pits, Torah was talking about do you remember, Carrie, what it was? I think it was something about asphalt pits. Tar pits. Yeah, maybe tar pits. But here they're calling it lime pits. Again, it's translation that makes it hard to figure this out. Into which they had fallen to meet Abram and his men. Now here's the king of Yerushalem, Adoni Zadik. They make it one name. But it's not a name of a person, it's a position of a person. It's his position in life. And we have to understand that this Melchizedek, that Canaan back in the antediluvian world was a Melchizedek, king of Jerusalem, king of the righteous men. Then it was who? Enoch. Then it was Methuselah. Then it became Noah. Now it's Shem. Soon, Abram is going to take the lead. And from Abram, it's going to go to Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. And from Joseph, it's going to go to Moses, carrying the rod of Elohim. Wow. So it says, the Adoni Zadik, king of Yerushalem. The same with Shem, the king of the righteous men. The righteous is king. They have no other king but Adoni Zadik went out with his men to meet Abram and his people with bread and wine, and they remained together in the valley of Melech. That's the king's valley. We saw that in Torah. Adoni Zadik blessed Abram, and Abram gave him a tenth. See, they called it a tenth here. Like I say, the translators, they like that tithe. Remember, that's what it's about. Got to get the tithe. We'll talk about tithing in future lessons. Gave him a tenth from all that he brought from the spoil of his enemies. Well, again, we forget that he brought the spoil from many, many, many towns. Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zor, they're little towns. But there was lots and lots of big towns that they took. And the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. See, now it says the kings of Sodom and Gomorrah. Torah just said the king of Sodom, who were there with their servants, approached Abram and begged of him, return them their servants, whom he had made captive, and take unto himself all the property. Now the kings of Sodom said to Abram, give me the persons. Yeah, they were talking about the persons. Here they're talking about the captives. Well, the captives are persons, males and females. And Abram answered the kings of Sodom. See, now we're talking about the kings of Sodom, aren't we? As Yehovah liveth, who created heaven and earth, who redeemed my soul from affliction, and who delivered me this day from my enemies, and gave them into my hand. I will not take anything belonging to you, that you may boast tomorrow, saying, Abram became rich from our property that he saved. No, I think it's not about the property. It's about who the property is coming from. Abram is not going to take the property from those kings of Sodom because he knows how wicked they are. And now, therefore, behold, here is all belonging to you. Take it and go. As Yehovah liveth, I will not take from you, from a living soul, a nephesh, down to a shutai or thread, excepting the expense of the food of those who went with me to battle. Who are the folks that went with him to battle? Those are the 318 men from his people, as also the portion of the men who went with me. There he is again, talking about Anar, Ashkel, Mamre, and their men. So they had men too. Those three men had men, as well as those who remained to watch the baggage. What baggage are we talking about? Could that be the spoil? They shall take their portion of the spoil. So we really are talking about three groups of men. The ones that went with Abram, the ones who went with Amri, and the ones who watched the spoil, the ones who kept the packages, the baggage they call it. Watch the baggage. And the kings of Sodom gave Abram according to all that he had said. And they pressed him to take of whatever he chose, but he would not. And he sent away the kings of Sodom and the remainder of their men, and he gave them orders about Lot. Gave them orders about Lot? What orders did he give about Lot? And they went to their respective places. What kind of orders would Abram give concerning Lot? Abram knows what? These are wicked men. Remember, we just saw it in 13 of Genesis. Could the orders have something to do with, you wicked guys, you leave my nephew alone, don't screw with him? I think that's what it was all about. And Lot, his brother's son, he also sent away with his property, and he went with them. Lot went with them, I guess. And Lot returned to his home, to Sodom. And Abram and his people, who are the people, the 318, all men, of course, returned to their home, to the plains of Mamre, which is Hebron. Remember, that's his headquarters right now. But now Yehovah is going to speak to Abram again. At that time, Yehovah again appeared to Abram in Hebron. And he said to him, do not fear. Do not fear. Thy reward is very great before me. Isn't it funny? He says, do not fear. Is it Yehovah appearing to him that would be fearful to Abram? When the Spirit Elohim comes to us, is there something to be afraid of? Remember, we saw Spirit Elohim on the mountain. And we listened to him. We were terrified. Don't let him talk to us anymore. You go talk to him, Moses. He says, do not fear. Thy reward is very great before me. Thy reward. We have a reward. If we're going to store up our treasure in heaven, I think this is the reward that is going to be very great before me. For I will not leave thee until I shall have multiplied thee and blessed thee and made thy seed like the stars in heaven, which cannot be measured nor numbered. and I will give unto thy seed these lands. Thy seed is going to get these lands. Again, we have to understand who the seed is. Ladies are not going to get any lands. It's about the men getting the lands. We've got to see and understand this. I will give unto thy seed these lands that thou seest with thine eyes. To them I will give them for an inheritance forever. Only be strong and do not fear. Walk before me and be perfect. Well, now it tells me I've got to go back to Genesis. Let's go there. He's going to have the same conversation. It says, and after these things. What things? The things we just talked about in Genesis 14. After the battle, after he talked to Melchizedek, after he dealt with the stuff giving into Sodom and Gomorrah, after these things, same conversation that we just had. He still says, do not be afraid. But look at, he's coming to him in a vision. Vision. And the words of Yehovah came to Abram in a vision. Came to him in a vision, saying, do not be afraid. There it is. Do not be afraid. He just fought 800,000 men. But yet, what's he afraid of? Is he afraid of Yehovah? I think that's what we're talking about. Coming face to face with the Elohim. Ruach Elohim is a scary thing. Because we are not holy as he is holy. Do not be afraid, Abram. I am thy shield. Thy shield. And thy exceedingly great reward. I'm your protector. I'm going to give you compensation for what you do for me. Well, here I can talk about it now. Gentiles most commonly have dreams rather than visions. Yehovah's men have both dreams and visions. And in this chapter, Abram is going to have both. He starts with a vision right here. But he's going to have a dream later on. As I said, Gentiles commonly have dreams. Look at it. Nimrod had a dream. Remember his dream? Then one man came and interpreted it for him. Pharaoh had dreams. Joseph interpreted his dreams. Abram has dreams and visions. I put Abraham, but same man, Abram, Abraham. Jacob, dreams and visions. Joseph, dreams and visions. Samuel had visions. Nathan had a vision. Isaiah, visions, dreams and visions. Balaam, remember, he had visions, but he had dreams. Yehovah spoke to him most often at night. But remember, he had one thing, chapter 22, where it says, I see with my eyes wide open. That was a vision. He's having a vision. Not sleeping this time. My eyes are open. But Abram said, look what he says. My master, Yehovah, what will you give me, seeing I go, it says, childless? And the heir of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. Look at it where he says. And Abram said, my master, Yehovah, Adonai, Yehovah. Oh, I got it backwards. Look at, I got the Yehovah here and the Adonai here. I just switched them. What wilt thou give me, seeing I go barren? He doesn't say childless, he says barren. You can translate it as childless, but let's understand it. It says bare. I go bare. Ariri, ariri, ariri. Bear, destitute. It says of children, childless. But it's bare. I go barren. Bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. Sarai is barren. He is barren. I go barren. And look what it says. They put heir, the heir of my house. But look what the word is. It says, and son, ben possessor, Mashak, the one who possesses the house. The possessor, the son, the possessor of my house is Eliezer of Damascus. I think the son possessor may have been a tradition for a man who does not have an heir, a true heir. They make this heir. That's not heir. It's not heir. It's son possessor. There's another word for heir. We'll see it in a moment. This says son possessor. Eliezer of Damascus, son possessor of my house. This is cool. He calls Yehovah Adonai. You know what? There's only two people in Torah who call Yehovah Adonai. I didn't say the Tanakh. I said Torah. Because in the Tanakh, other people will call Yehovah Adonai. Isaiah does it constantly. Ezekiel does it constantly. Jeremiah probably does it as well. But in Torah, there's only two people. You know who the two people are? Abram and Moses. I think this is really interesting, and I want to show you some things about this particular word. Adonai, Adoni, Yehovah. We say Adonai. I don't know why we say Adonai. I think it's because we want to treat it like it's different somehow. It's the same word. If we say Avi, my father, or Aki, my brother, it's E. But for some reason, we don't say Adoni, we say Adonai. Doctrines and Traditions of Men, I think it's designed to lead us away from understanding what an Adonai is. Let's talk about what an Adonai is. Here is Ancient Hebrew Lexicon of the Bible. It says the Hebrew word Adoni, look at they even spell it Adonai, comes from the root word Adon, Aleph, Dalet, Nun, which can mean to rule, a sovereign, a controller, a master, a lord, sir. The king is always the Adoni, my lord. The ancient Hebrew ideograph may help to explain this word conceptually. The Aleph is a picture of an ox. There's the ox, which conveys the idea of strength. The Dalet is a picture of a door. Well, the Nun is a picture of a sperm or seed. We're talking about men. There are no Lady Adons, which convey the sense of life. Together, these three letters may be read as strong door of life. Strong door of life. Who was it that used Adonai? I just told you, Abram and Moses. Abram was the strong door of life. Moses is the strong door of life. The 144,000 are going to be the strong door of life. If you join yourself to Abram, if you join yourself to Moses, if you join yourself to the servants of Yehovah who call him Adonai, you're going to find life. Those that don't, won't. These three words may allude, oh, this is so good. These three words may allude to a ritual described in Torah of a slave who loves his master, the man who leads in peace and desires to remain in his master's house even after his time of service is complete, whereupon he has his ear pierced to the doorpost. Isn't that interesting? We're talking about the Dalet, the strong Dalet Nun. What do we call that? The strong door of life. He wants to get his ear pierced to the strong door of life and be his perpetually. All his seed will be his perpetually. Oh my goodness. Well, Yehovah has appeared to Abram in the past and spoken to him. This is the first time that we hear Abram speaking back to Yehovah. Here's a vision. Abram is speaking back to Yehovah. It's always been Yehovah speaking to him. Now he's talking back. Is there a development in this relationship going on? But clearly this indicates a noticeable change in the relationship between Abram and Yehovah. Abram's choice of words demonstrates that he understands his relationship with the Creator in the use of the title Adonai, Yehovah. But this title is only used only three other times besides this time. And again, it's used in this chapter. We're going to see it in verse 8. But it's used by Moses twice. But only Abram and Moses called Yehovah Adonai. Everybody else called Moses Adonai. And I'm sure Abram Adonai. I don't see any places, I haven't noticed any places where they called Abram Adonai, but I'm sure they did. He's the head of the camp. His men, born in his house, took him with him. He led him. Do you think he's the Adonai? Of course he is. But here's the heir. Son Meshach and son Meshach of my house. That's what they're translating as heir. I think erroneously. And again, because we are reading it in the English, it's hard to see it. We don't understand that the son Meshach, if you don't have an heir, is going to be the one who gets the house, going to get the servants, going to get the leadership. He's going to be the new Adonai. But Yehovah's got something more to say about that. "24 of Genesis, verse 2 says this. So Abram said to his oldest servant in the house. Okay, this is Eliezer, the oldest servant in his house. Where did Eliezer come from? He's the very first servant that Abram received. Do you remember who Abram received Eliezer from? Carrie knows it. He says, Nimrod. Here it is, right here. And this thing seemed very wonderful. Remember, he stayed in the fire for 3 days and didn't get burned. And this thing seemed very wonderful in the eyes of the king, Nimrod, and his princes, his brothers. And Abram was, or his uncles, not his brothers. Remember, his uncles were his, in fact, his father and his brothers, and his father's brothers, his uncles, were actually the princes. And the king gave Abram many presents, and he gave him his 2 head servants from the king's house. The name of one was Onai, and the other was Eleazar. It appears to me that Onai or Oni died. Now Eleazar is the oldest one in Abram's house. Maybe it was Eleazar was just older than Onai or Oni. We don't know. But this is where Eleazar comes from. This is why he is the son Meshech, the possessor of the house. Well, like I said, Yehovah has something to say about that. Here it is right here. And Abram, I'm reading on the right, and Abram said, look, you have given me no seed. They said offspring. Offspring? What do you think when you think offspring? Do you think men and women? Is it about men and women? No, it's about sons. The word is seed. We're talking about men. Okay, I know you think that I am a broken record. But if I don't keep conveying this idea to you, you're not going to get it. You're not going to get the bad ideas in our minds corrected. And I've got to work hard for you to see that. He says, you have given me no seed. Here, the word is this, zara. Zara. You've given me no seed. And indeed, the son of my house, there it is again, same words, son of my house. They left off the Meshech part. Now it's just called the son of my house, is my heir. There's the heir, Yarash. You see that? Yarash. That's heir. The son of my house is my heir. Son of my house. There's the Bain, the Ben, and here is house. It's Bayit, and again it has the Yod after it, which says my, B-T, B-T, B-T. I think is how you would say that in the Hebrew. The son of my house, the possessor of my house. The last verse called him the Betit, or the son, Ben, Meshik, Beni, Betit, Benit, whatever it is. Eleazar is not seed. He is a son possessor of his house. But Yehovah says, what? This shall not be thy heir. Thy what? Yarash. Now Yehovah assures Abram that his heir would be a seed from his body. Yehovah then promises that not only an heir, but a nation would come from his seed. Oh my goodness. This whole chapter is about spiritually born men. Not men of the flesh, men of the spirit. Abram is a spiritual man. What did he just call him? Here, remember what Eleazar said about Abram? Let's look at it because I think we forget. Blessed be Abram of Elohim Most High, possessor of heaven and earth. He is spiritual. This is a spiritual man who possesses heaven and earth, those who dwell in heaven and those who dwell in earth. This whole chapter 15 is about Abram, the spiritual man, and his spiritual seed. Let's keep this in mind. The next chapter is going to be about the flesh seed, Ishmael, who comes from Hagar. The chapter after that is going to be about the spiritual men once again and the destruction of Sodom and Gomorrah, which is a shadow picture of what's going to happen in the last days when the spiritual men are raised up and begin to possess the land. This is how Yehovah is speaking to Abram. Now he goes to verse 4. Here it is on the right. I'm going to move this up to see them both. And behold, the word of Yehovah came to him, saying, they're having a conversation in his vision. He shall not be thy heir. Who's the he? Eliezer. He shall not be thy heir. Look at the word they use. That's the word Yarash. Thy Yarash. He shall not be thy heir, but he who will come from thy own body, really this says thy bowels, shall be thy Yarash. Thy, this is what it says, thy. Yarash, thy Yarash. He shall be thy heir, the one who comes from your bowels. But now, who comes from his bowels? Ishmael's the first one that seems to come from his bowels, isn't he? But we're not talking about Ishmael. We're talking about who? Isaac. Remember, we're talking about spiritual men begetting spiritual men, not begetting flesh men, spiritual men. Seed after their own kind. These are the ones we're talking about. This whole chapter is about spiritual men. Let's remember that. 5. Then he brought him, Abram, outside and said, look now towards heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them. And he said to them, so shall your seed be. Why is a lady not seed? Because she gets given to another man and produces seed for him. She's not seed. She produces the seed. She replicates the seed. When we talked a woman, appendage. Bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh. The appendage gives birth to the seed. That's why Abram said to Yehovah, he's barren. My appendage hasn't given me any seed. I'm barren. I'm bare. Well, look at what it says here. Talking about looking towards the heaven and counting the stars, if you are able to number them. I like this verse in Daniel. It says, those who are wise shall shine like the brightness of the firmament, and those who turn many to righteousness like the stars forever and ever. Those who turn many to righteousness are like the stars forever and ever. Well, I would like to think that it would always talk about the stars of heaven when it's referring to Yehovah's called out, set apart men and their seed after them. But it's not. Because here it talks about, and this is my words, and I'm probably should have just erased those. It talks about the dust of the earth. Here's the verse. Let me just read it to you. And I will make your descendants, your seed, talking to Abraham again, as the dust of the earth, so that if a man could number the dust of the earth, then your descendants also could be numbered. Well, this is me putting this business about the lower nature. That's erroneous, so just take care of that altogether. Men created from the dust, you want to have that. Okay, we're still talking about spiritual men. You can't make the dust flesh seed and the spiritual seed. When we're talking about Abram's seed, it doesn't work. Then he brought him, Abram, outside and said, look towards heaven and count the stars if you are able to number them. And he said to him, so shall your seed be. Verse 6. Here it says in my New King James, and he believed in Yehovah, and he accounted it to him for righteousness. You know, this is what we believe. Believe in Jesus, and now we're going to be righteous. We use this verse to support that argument. Believe in God. Believe in the Lord. What does it really say? Here's what it says. And trusting in Yehovah, he will account it to him for righteousness. He shall account it to him for righteousness. Didn't do it then, but he's going to do it if you keep trusting in Yehovah. Remember, we're working out our salvation in fear and trembling. If we don't keep the Passover, men, every year we get kicked out of Israel. But if we keep trusting for the hope that is in us and following this invisible kingdom, even though we can't see it right now, and we won't see it for another more than 400 years, close to 500 years. He says he will account it to him for righteousness. And trusting in Yehovah. Abram's going to keep trusting in Yehovah, doing the things that he asked him to do, not the kings of Canaan asked him to do. The kings of Sodom asked him to give him the stuff. He says, no, I'm not going to do that. Thank you very much. Then he said, I am the Elohim who brought you out, who brought thee out of the land, out of Ur. The land, I get distracted, I want to change this. Who brought thee out of Ur of the Chaldees to give thee this land to inherit it. Now Moses is going to say, and he said, my master, Yehovah. There it is, the second time that he calls Yehovah his master in Torah. And the last time that Abram calls Yehovah his master in Torah. Master, my master, Yehovah. How shall I know that I will inherit it? Well, now this is interesting. Here is, he says to him, so he said to him, bring me a 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat, a 3-year-old ram, a turtle dove, and a young pigeon. What's going on here? Why is he bringing this stuff? I mean, this is not an olah offering. It could be a shalem, a peace offering, but he's not talking about a shakat. He's talking about just simply dividing these animals. He says, how shall I know that I will inherit it? He's going to give him a sign. Do you remember? Who was it that got the sign? Who fought the Midianites? Gideon. Remember, he said, put this on the ground, and if the ground is wet and the fur is dry, then you know that what I said is true. And then he did it the next night. He wanted to do it twice. I think this is what's going on here. Give me a sign. This is going to be the sign, but this is going to be a sign that is going to be prophetic in nature. Dividing the animals. Bring me 3-year-old heifer, a 3-year-old female goat. Talking about a cow, a goat, a sheep, a turtle dove, and a pigeon. All the clean animals and birds that we eat. Or representative of that anyway. It says, then he brought all these to him and cut them in two down the middle. Did he tell him to do that? But no, he did it. Cut them in two down the middle and placed each piece opposite the other. But he did not cut the birds in two. I'm going to read the next verse. And when the vultures came down to the carcasses, Abram drove them away. There's vultures coming down on the carcasses. We have to ask ourselves, what do the animals represent? What do the carcasses represent? And there's going to be a third thing that's going to happen here. Let me just read my note here. This is in Genesis 15:10. This is a really good note. I have to give Glenn McWilliams the credit for this note. There was another note up above that he added to as well. I've changed some of this. I love the man. He's got some things that he just hasn't seen yet. He's still talking about the children of Israel, and he doesn't understand the role of a man, no man, and the role of a woman. Doesn't understand how a man comes into the kingdom and how a woman comes into the kingdom. There's lots to see, but he's got some really good stuff, and this is one of his best. Let me read it to you. Regardless of which way we read the passage, what becomes quite evident is the sovereign one that enters into the binding covenant with Abram. Okay, the covenant is, how will I know that my heir, my seed is going to inherit the earth? The ritual described in this passage is the typical pattern of an ancient Near Eastern cutting of a covenant. Many scholars have taught that this type of covenant implies a binding of the participants by dramatized curse invoked upon themselves should such violate the terms of the covenant. In other words, what he's saying is, I'm slitting my goat's throat, and you're slitting your goat's throat. And if either one of us does not live up to the covenant, we're going to get our throat cut, just as we cut that throat. Okay? The most frequently cited texts to support this thesis are that the procedures taken by Abram's function as a dramatized curse in the 7th century treaty. Okay, well, they're talking about kind of what I was just telling you about. Let's move on. What we see in this text and others is the idea that the cutting of the covenant, and remember, when we talk about covenant, that's what covenant means. It means cutting. It's a cutting. That's when you read the word barith. Barith is cutting. Of a covenant includes self-induced curse of violating the terms of the covenant. We see this idea again. I'm going to skip that. Maybe this isn't the one I wanted you to have. You know what? I'm going to skip the rest of this. There's another note that I was particularly interested in that I wanted to read to you. This is getting too lengthy, and I don't want to go there. Let's continue. Now he says, now the sun was going down, and a deep sleep fell upon Abram. Okay, what's happened? He's made a promise to him in the vision. He said, take these animals. Didn't tell him to cut them. Abram cut them in half, laid them out. Half of the goat with half of the goat. Half of the sheep with half of the sheep. Half of the cattle with half of the cattle. Bird. Now he's going to sleep. The sun's going down. It's getting dark in the world. And a deep sleep fell upon Abram. The spiritual man has fallen asleep. Okay, I'm trying to help you see some things here. He's fallen asleep. And behold, horror and great darkness fell upon him. What's going on with Abraham? He had a vision first. Now what's he having? A dream. This is his dream. It's a prophetic dream. Let me just read this for you first. I kind of alluded to some of this. This is the note that I was thinking of that I wanted you to read from Glenn McWilliams. We should also take note that it was while Abraham was in a deep sleep that horror and exceeding darkness overcame him in his dream. I added some of my words to these words. In his dream, he received the revelation that his seed would be sojourners and slaves, some of each. Some are going to be sojourners, some are going to be slaves in a foreign land. Here we may understand that this overwhelming darkness in the life of Israel is provoked by a sense of spiritual laxity and sleep. Oh, this is so beautiful. I hope that you're going to catch this. Here is, let me see if I can pull this down a little bit more. Every time it's going to go to the same spot. I'll just read it to you. Awake! Awake! Remember, we're talking about spiritual laxity and a deep sleep has fallen upon Israel, the spiritual men. Awake! Awake! This is about the last days. Put on strength, O arm of Yehovah. Who's going to be the arm of Yehovah? The spiritual men that he's raising up in the last days. Israel's going to be his spiritual, the men in Egypt are going to be those spiritual men. Well, we're the men in Egypt. We're going to see Egypt is now. Awake as in the ancient days, in the generations old. Are you not the arm that cut Rahab apart? Remember, that's Rahab is Egypt. And wounded the serpent. Who's the serpent? The serpent is Pharaoh, the one who was drowned in the sea. And, are you not the one who dried up the sea, the waters of the great deep, and made the depths of the sea a road for the redeemed to cross over? So the ransomed of Yehovah shall return and come to Zion with singing. Who's the Zion? Zion is, remember, we said Jerusalem. Zion, the holy city, all the same place, all the same people, those who lead in peace. The spiritual men, like Abraham and Abram. So the ransomed of Yehovah shall return and come to Zion with singing, with everlasting joy in their heads. They shall obtain joy and gladness, sorrow and sighing shall flee away. Even I, am he who comforts you. Who are you that you should be afraid of a man who will die, and of a son of man who will be made like grass? made like grass. There's going to be a lot of people who are going to die. We're talking about a deep sleep right now. Here's another one talking about awake, awake. You know what? I'm just going to go to it and read it there. Awake, awake. Put on your strength, O Zion. There it is. Same people. Jerusalem. Put on your beautiful garments, O Jerusalem. Yerushalem. The holy city. Zion, Jerusalem, the holy city. Men, not a place. For the uncircumcised and the unclean shall no more come to you. Shake yourself from the dust. Arise, sit down, O Yerushalem. Loose yourself from the bands of your neck. You captive daughter of Zion. You've been captive too long. He goes on. When Israel slumbers or becomes spiritually lax, darkness and oppression seem to overwhelm her. When Israel fails to keep the commandments and covenant of Yehovah, her light is diminished. Keep the covenants. You know what? I don't even think he knew what he was saying when he said it, but he's so right. Talking about Passover and keeping that covenant. The time of life. It says her light is diminished. We may also note that it was when the sun went down and exceeding darkness prevailed that the presence of Yehovah shone like a smoking furnace and a burning lamp. Oh my gosh, wait till you see. Here the imagery invokes scenes of the pillar of fire and smoke that led Israel out of her bondage in Egypt and through the darkness of the wilderness. This dream seemed so foreign to me when I first read it. I had to think about it. It was not until I read what I saw here with Glenn McWilliams that it came to me. What are we talking about? This is prophetic. This dream is all about prophecy and what's going to happen in the last days of Israel. But it's even just a shadow picture of what's going to happen in the last days, our last days. Watch what happens. Here the imagery invokes the pillar of fire and smoke that led Israel out of bondage in Egypt and through the darkness of the wilderness. We may also see a connection with the smoke and fire of Yehovah's presence at Mount Sinai. Indeed, it is the darkest hours that Yehovah's glory shines the brightest. We should note here as well the parallel between Abram's life and that prophesied of his seed. Here's what he says. Abram was a sojourner in the land, not his own. Abram was driven to Egypt. Remember when he first came out, 75 years old, in Genesis 12, that same year he went to Egypt. Abraham suffered Sarai's captivity in Egypt. Abraham was driven out by Pharaoh. And Abram came out with great wealth. We're going to come out with great wealth from this kingdom into the next. Now look what it talks about in Egypt. And this is what this whole chapter is about. The 430 years that Abram is a captive in Egypt. His seed is a captive in Egypt. When we came out, it says, when we see this, we see the same message prophesied over the descendants, the seed of Abraham in Egypt in the latter days. The descendants, we're talking about the seed. They shall sojourn in a land not their own. They shall suffer captivity and servitude. They shall come out of the land of captivity. they shall come out with great wealth. And this is my words. And this is happening right now all over the world. Happening right now throughout the world. And in these last days, the wealth of the wicked is going to be found in the hands of the righteous as we begin the millennial reign of Yehovah. We're going to take the wealth of this world and it's going to come into the millennial kingdom with us. Thy reward shall be exceedingly great. Now, let's talk about this dream now that we have some better understanding about this. I'm going to read the start of it again. Now the sun was going down. Deep sleep fell on Abraham. Remember, the spiritual man falling asleep in the darkness. And behold, horror and great darkness fell. You shall be redeemed. Whoops, fell. I got a mixture here. Fell upon him. Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your seed will be strangers, ger, in a land that is not theirs. I am right now, even though I'm an Ezra, I'm a ger with respect to the land that I'm dwelling in right now. You follow what I'm saying? I'm foreign to that land. I'm a stranger. But I'm still a ger in that respect. But this is happening right now all over the world. And in these last days, the wealth of the wicked. Maybe that's the same thing that we were just reading. Then he said to Abram, know certainly that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. 400 years? What's going on here? Do you remember? We were reading. Here, actually, I got a note on it. 400 years. Oh. Then he said to Abram, no. Yada. No, for certain. No. Trusting in Yehovah. No. That thy seed will be strangers, there's the ger, in a land that is not theirs yet, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. 400 years. Do you remember we were reading Genesis 12? Well, here it is right here. 12:40 through 41. Here, let me raise this up. Now the sojourn of Israel's seed who lived in Egypt was 430 years. And it came to pass at the end of 430 years, on that very same day, it came to pass that all the armies, the hosts of Yehovah, went out of the land of Egypt. Who's the host? Who's the army? Israel. The seed, Abram's seed. But that says 430 years. This says 400 years. How do we reconcile these two? Wow, I'm running out of time. How do we reconcile these two amounts? I reconciled the first. Remember, we saw that Abram received this prophecy when he was 70 years old, the first time. Here's the prophecy. Abram receives a prophecy. This is Yashar 13:17. And it was that the 15th year of Abram's dwelling in the land of Canaan, which is the 70th year of the life of Abram. And Yehovah appeared to Abram in that year, said to him, I am Yehovah who brought you brought thee out of Ur-Kasdim to give thee the land for an inheritance. Now therefore walk before me and be perfect and keep my commands. To thee and to thy seed I give this land. To thee and thy seed I give this land. Okay, this is when Abram is 70 years old. And it says he came out 430 years to the day in Exodus 12. But now, 5 years later is when Abram goes into the wilderness. And three years after that is now when Yehovah is talking to Abram in this dream. So first Yehovah gave him this number. Well, he didn't even give him this number. He gave him a dream saying that you were going to get this. They were going to inherit this land. But now Yehovah is saying they're going to inherit this land, and he's going to give him a specific number. 400 years. But look what it says. Does it say 400 years for Abraham and thy seed? No, it doesn't. Look what it says. Let's take a look at it carefully. I guess I've got to go up here to read it in my translation. Then he said to Abram, no, for certain that your seed will be strangers in a land that is not theirs, and will serve them, and they will afflict them 400 years. Okay, this is his seed. But Abraham doesn't have any seed yet, does he? And he's not going to get a seed for when? 25 years. Well, 22 years. You're right. But he is going to get a man-child from Hagar when he's 86. Is that the man we're talking about? Is that the seed we're talking about? Or are we talking about spiritual men having spiritual seed? And the seed that's actually going to come from his body. Is Hagar his body? Bone of his bone, flesh of his flesh? No, she's a concubine. No, there's more to understand here. Because now, remember, that was 430 years. We got it to the day. But now, look at this. When you figure out, we have five years that he was in Canaan before he left. Remember, he got the prophecy when he was 70 years old. Then 5 years, 75 is when he leaves in Exodus 12, or Genesis 12. And then 25 years later, when he's 100, what happens? Isaac is going to be born when he's 100 years old. From that time to the time that we leave Egypt is going to be precisely 400 years. So you see, he's giving this number twice, and if we have eyes to see, really, we needed Yasher to be able to see it, because I couldn't see this. I tried to figure this out for many, many years. And it wasn't until Yasher that I saw it. And it wasn't until yesterday that I figured out where the 400 years figures in. Because look what it's talking about. It's talking about your seed. Not you. Your seed. Well, his seed then is not Ishmael, because if it's Ishmael, it doesn't work out to 400 years, but if it's Isaac, it does. Oh my goodness, we're talking about spiritual men all throughout this chapter. Let's go on to 14. It says, and also the nation whom they serve, I will judge. The nation who they serve, I will judge. Okay, who's the nation that they served? Well, it's even beyond that. Because if we're afflicted for 430 years, back when he was 70. We're talking about Haran. We're talking about Canaan. We're talking about Egypt. We're talking about all those places, aren't we? They're all Egypt. Abram, the spiritual man, is dwelling in Egypt right now. See, we read this 430 years and we think we were in Egypt for 430 years. Well, we were and we weren't. We were in spiritual Egypt for 430 years, but we were in the land of Egypt for 210 years. The first 210 years, or the first half of the 210 years, about 90 years, we were blessed. And in the second half, after Joseph died, we were put into servitude. But not all of us were put into servitude. You know who didn't serve Egypt? You know who did not work for Pharaoh? The Levites didn't work for Pharaoh. Right now, there's people that work for Pharaoh. But there's people like me who don't work for Pharaoh. They work for Yehovah. But we're still afflicted in this land. There's lots of things that I can't do freely. But it isn't going to go on forever. And also the nation whom they serve, I will judge. Afterwards they, the righteous men, shall come out with great possessions. Going to happen again in the last days. Now as for you, as for thee, thou shalt go to thy fathers in peace, and you shall be buried at a good old age. Abram is going to die in Genesis 25. This is the sum of the years of Abraham's life, which he lived 175 years. What did he say? You shall be buried at a good old age. But now, look what it says. But in the fourth generation, they shall return here. They, who's they? Israel, the spiritual men. Let's think of them as the spiritual men. Because if we think of them as Israel, we lose track of what Abram's doing right now with Isaac and Jacob, who's not Israel yet. Fourth generation. But in the fourth generation shall return, for the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. They say the Amorites. The Amorites. Well, it's far more than just the Amorites. It's all the ites. The Canaanites are part, or the Amorites are part of the Canaanites. Amari is an Amorite. So all the people, all the seed of Amari, the men, that we're talking about men, are the Amorites. But it says in the fourth generation, they shall return here. Well, you know what? I haven't been able to figure out this fourth generation, but yesterday when I was thinking about it, it occurred to me that maybe the fourth generation, I always wanted to make it from Abraham, but I think there's more. It says the fourth generation, he died. As for you, you shall be buried at a good old age. He's dead, but in the fourth generation. So I wanted to look at who is living and who was dead when Abraham died. Does that make sense? Here's what I found out. Let me just go to my deal here. I have my age chart. We'll bring it up. It is in my public section right here. And here's the age chart. Here's Abraham. In fact, let me just zoom in on this a little bit. All right, this is Abraham right here. Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. When Abraham died, Jacob was how old? Abraham died when he was 2123. Jacob was born in 2108. That would mean 15. Jacob was 15 years old. Jacob was held on the lap of Abraham potentially for 15 years. Abraham knew Jacob. So when we're talking about fourth generation, I got a hunch that Jacob might not be included. And if that's the case, here's what I would suggest is the fourth generation. Jacob is 15 years old before Abram dies. Could the four generations be these? Levi, Kohath, Amram, Moses. Could that be the four generations? Remember, if Jacob was already alive, he saw Jacob, but he didn't get to see the four generations after that. And it was the generation of Moses who brought Israel into the land of promise. He really was supposed to do it even 40 years before he did do it. And remember, he disobeyed, so he didn't even get to go into the land of promise. He got to see it. Could that be the fourth generation? I think it is. And I think this makes even more sense when we were just talking about them being servants in a land not their own. Because it was the Levites who did not work for Pharaoh. Talking about the iniquity of the Amorites is not yet complete. I want to read to this verse. This is from Deuteronomy 9, which was really written in the 120th year of Moses' life. It says this, "Speak not thou in thine heart after Yehovah thy Elohim has cast them out from before thee, saying, For my righteousness Yehovah has brought me in to possess this land." In other words, it's not about our righteousness that we are possessing the land, but what is it? But the wickedness of these nations that Yehovah does drive them out before thee. He has made a promise to Abraham's seed, the spiritual men, that they're going to get the land. They're not the spiritual men, the Amorites. The Canaanites are going to be cast out, and the whole world is going to be cast out in the last days. This is a shadow picture of future events as well. But the wickedness of these nations, Yehovah does drive them out from before thee. Not for the righteousness or the uprightness of thine heart dost thou go to possess the land, but for the wickedness of these nations, Yehovah thy Elohim does drive them out before thee, and that he may perform the word which Yehovah swore unto Abram, Isaac, and Jacob. See, it's about Yehovah filling his word about his seed in the last days. Just as he fulfilled his word short term with the 400 years, he's going to do it long term for us if we will become Abram's spiritually born men, Yehovah's seed, the Ezra men. "17. And it came to pass, when the sun went down and it was dark, that behold, there appeared," look what it says, "a smoking oven and a burning torch that passed between those pieces." Could this be the shadow picture of the pillar of fire and smoke that Moses was led by when he brought the seed out of Egypt 400 years from the time Isaac is born? I think this is what we're talking about. It's not about a pot. It's not about a torch. It's about the smoke and fire that pass between the pieces. What pieces is it passing between? Flesh. All flesh is going to be divided. Could this be spirit and soul division? That this pillar of fire is going to divide between flesh and spirit? Some will follow, some won't. Perhaps. You can only take a prophetic picture like this so far. But to me, this is what we're talking about. Fire and smoke passing between the flesh, the pieces. Birds coming down. What are the birds that are going to come down? The what do they call them? The vultures. Yeah, the vultures. Could those be Satan's helpers, perhaps, coming down from the heavens in these last days, trying to eat the flesh of the earth, make it theirs? He says, on the same day, Yehovah made a covenant, same day, saying, to your seed, let me move this up, to your seed I have given this land, from the river of Egypt to the great river. What's the great river? I'm glad you asked. The river Euphrates. What land are we talking about? The Amorites' land? No, more than that. The Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Cadmonites, the Hittites, the Perizzites, the Raphaim, the Amorites. These are all Canaanites. Amorites, Canaanites. They say the Canaanites, but the Amorites are Canaanites. The Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. Here's the Canaanites. The Canaan begat Sidon, Jebusite, Heth, the Jebusite, there's the Jebusite, the Amorite, who's Amari, the Girgashite, who is Girgashi, there's the Girgashites, and then they talk about the Canaanites. Well, the Canaanites, the other three are Canaanites. At any rate, we're getting all the land. And in the last days, it's going to be Abram's seed who are going to get all the land who belongs to the earth, because the earth is Yehovah's and all those who dwell in it. Do you want the exceedingly great reward? Then become Israel's seed, Abram's seed. In this case, well, it's all part of a beautiful picture if we will just stop and look at this and learn it. Hey, thanks for joining me again this week. We're going to pick this up next week in chapter 16. We're going to get to talk about Hagar, the taking of Hagar and the producing of a flesh seed. Exactly what Israel has done right now in taking the promised land for themselves. A bunch of Jews who, by covenant and force and bribery and money, took it for themselves before the time. But they're not Israel. They're not Abram's seed. They're not the spiritually born men. They're men and women, for this matter, serving in another kingdom called Israel, the state. Well, that's all part of a bigger picture too. But we're talking about spiritually born men. That's what this chapter, that's what Abram's all about. Abram is the spiritually born man. Well, let's continue this next week. Hey, love you tons. Father, give us eyes to see, ears to hear, hearts that understand. We need you to lead us, to teach us your ways for a man and your ways for a woman. Father, let us conform our lives to your created purpose so that we can live through these last days. We love you so much. Hey, we'll see you next week.
Bye, guys.